Hi, I'm Steve Waterhouse. I work with Dan at Pantera. I want to say, on behalf of everybody here, thanks so much to Dan for hosting us.
Get down.
It's the second time I've been here, and it's great to have great people from the Bitcoin world here. And also thanks to Johnny for a great talk and very inspiring, talking about risk and different techniques and adapting to new environments, which I know we're all very familiar with on a daily basis. I'm here to introduce Dan Kaminsky, who's going to be our next speaker. I met Dan probably about 9 months ago, and he is, I don't know if should I call you a hacker?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's a hacker, right? But he's one of the good guys. So quite a while back in, what was it, 2000, what DNS was 2008? 2008. Dan discovered a flaw in DNS, and if you know what DNS is the thing that turns IP addresses, which is numbers, into things like www.yahoo.com. That's DNS. And he discovered a flaw which basically meant that anybody could compromise it and take over and really own the internet. And he subsequently fixed it and has become certainly one of the most preeminent people in security and hacking on the white hat side in the world. About a couple of years ago, he wrote an interesting paper talking about how he was unable to hack Bitcoin. And I think he's going to talk a little bit about it tonight. And he's currently the chief scientist for a company and founder of a company called White Ops, whose mission is to figure out when you're accessing a website, whether you're a person or a robot. He's also a great guy, and I have great pleasure in introducing him for tonight's concluding dinner speech.
So, hello everyone. I want to say how much of an honor it is to be in such distinguished company. Bitcoin is an unusual thing for me to be participating in. There's a lot of people who are very passionate for Bitcoin. There's a lot of people who aren't exactly big fans. I am very neutral on the technology and have been from the beginning. And my coworkers at White Ops, will ask me, Dan, if you're so neutral on this technology, why do you keep writing papers on it and talking about it at events? What are you doing here? And the way I respond to them is basically saying, look, I'm not sure where this technology is going, but we're going to learn stuff from this journey. And the stuff that we're going to learn in Bitcoin is going to inform a lot of technology in the realm of security, which I absolutely do care about, and is really going to inform the way that technology and society interact. And that's unusual. A lot of the stuff we do in tech is very nerdy, but very isolated. It's like, we nerds are going to play with it for a while, but whether it's going to affect the outside world is kind of up in the air. Not with Bitcoin, oh no. No, it is very clear. Bitcoin's kind of changing the rules of a lot of things. Where should I begin? Let's talk about journalism for a moment. Can we all admit maybe the most embarrassing journalism in the last couple of years was with a certain Dorian Satoshi Nakamoto? Like, that's just sad. But it's sad in a really interesting way. So if you're not familiar, Newsweek has been off the magazine stand. I grew up with Newsweek. It was, where I got my news as a kid. And it kind of got off the newsstands for a while. Magazines have been struggling in this new era of journalism. And they really wanted a story to kind of welcome themselves back to, print media is a thing. It is a thing that matters, that people should pay attention to. And they really wanted the scoop. Like, by the way, most journalists a huge number of journalists for the last couple of years have been hunting the story of who the heck created this Bitcoin thing. It was mentioned earlier that I did this whole DNS hack. The reporter who reported on me hacking DNS also reported on his adventures trying to track down Satoshi. Now, my guy was actually honest, and he's like, we thought this one Irish kid might have been him, but no. And that actually came from, I was already going to Dublin, so I just went to Dublin, went to Trinity College, found the kid, got him absolutely shit-faced, and found out pretty clearly, no, this was not this kid did not start Bitcoin when he was 19 years old. And that was actually what was reported back in the day when, print media was actually honest, I guess. The Newsweek article was really interesting for a couple reasons. It would not have been published if this was not such a subject of mainstream interest. The amount of pressure that had to exist to get this obvious problem out there. And if you look at the article, it's really interesting. The writer knows she's full of it. Like, when is the last time you ever saw the phrase, "my brother is an asshole," in print? The entire article is an article walking itself back. It's amazing. But it didn't matter, because let me tell you, that thing sold. And that was all that Newsweek had to do, and they had to do it. They had to come out with something big. And so that's interesting, because there's never been this for OpenSSH or PGP. But Bitcoin is a zeitgeist, is this larger thing that, whether you like it or not, cannot be ignored. I do want to say something that maybe some of us haven't really realized. Because I don't want to say Bitcoin's a bit of an echo chamber, but, a bit. I don't care how many good things you hear from governmental sources. The feds do not like Bitcoin. Let's not pretend they do, because they don't. They'll say all the right things about wanting to support innovation and wanting, to allow things to be good. But when push comes to shove, man, you are not getting that bank account opened. Guys, it's not an organized thing, because one of the most interesting changes that's happened in the last few years has been the realization that if you want to screw with the internet, you do not do it all at once with a huge organized response, because then, the immune system shows up. The lobbyists, the huge press, Reddit and Wikipedia go down. That comes from when we were fighting SOPA and PIPA. That was a full court press against the internet. And at the end of the day, so background, SOPA and PIPA were this legislation that was about filtering the internet and getting rid of all of these pirate websites. About once every 6 weeks for a year and a half, I went out to Washington to go ahead and deal with this legislation. We responded in force. It wasn't just us, it was everybody. But at the end of the day, we had things like, some with this one senator's staffers. It has actually happened. And, we're talking, and the guy's like, do you know anyone who's like in my senator's state? And I'm like, yeah, actually, we know of a couple people. We can have them contact you. Guy's like, no, never mind. We got like 3,000 emails yesterday. And he wasn't exaggerating. So, if there's one thing that governments around the world have figured out in general, it's you don't go after this stuff directly, because when it's too direct, we actually fight back. They've realized the strategy is infiltration and quiet harassment while keeping a nice face on. At least this is my perception of things. It seems to be what's happening. Yes, you do have things like Coinbase, which are actually managing to work. They seem to just be going at it anyway, despite whatever restrictions might be attempted. And they're getting away with it because, let's be honest, they've got enormous VC backing. But do I see Coinbase number 2, 3, 4, 5? Not really. Do I see a lot of bank accounts being allowed to be opened? No. There's a lot of pushback. Where's the Apple Bitcoin apps? I went to an event where a pretty high up guy at Apple was like, hey, we want to know what you want for Bitcoin apps. What do you need? We're here to help. We're here to listen. And I'm like, you're pretty high up and you're asking these questions, and I'm going to tell you in the next 6 months, there's not going to be an Apple Bitcoin wallet. He's like, no, I don't know what you're talking about. There's not an Apple Bitcoin wallet. It's not an organized thing, but there might very well be more pushback than you're willing to, I say willing, than we as a community are necessarily accepting. And so I bring this up not to discourage you, but just to make sure that we're all, talking in reality here. It's a little messy out there. So speaking of neutrality, I do want to say I have no Bitcoin holdings. In fact, I actually have negative Bitcoin holdings. I sort of made a bet a while ago that was a little ill-advised. I bet in May of last year that within a year, the Bitcoin proof of work function was going to change. I am almost certainly going to lose this bet. And I'd like to actually talk about this loss, of, how I was wrong and why. So the nature of Bitcoin in its proof of work function is that if you're willing to go ahead and make custom circuitry, you are able to compute, basically you are able to mine, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of times faster, millions of times faster. You are able to basically corner the market to a degree where only other people who have the same kind of hardware as you are relevant. Everyone else should go off and do something else. And my assumption was that this would eventually cause Bitcoin to change to a different work function so more people could participate. What actually did happen is all the people who couldn't mine actually went and did something else. So all of the post-Bitcoin mining systems use a different algorithm than Bitcoin. Dogecoin, whatnot, they're all on what's called scrypt. And the interesting thing about scrypt, people say, oh, you could ASIC mine scrypt as well. Yes, but not with the same magnification factor. When you mine faster in Bitcoin, everyone else can go screw themselves. When you mine faster in Dogecoin, there's a restriction on the amount of memory. You actually need a lot of memory in order to play this game. So it's like, well, at some point, I need terabytes of memory. And my cost of terabytes of memory is not actually cheaper on an ASIC than it is versus a PC. So sure, I might get 10 times faster, or 20 times faster, but I'm not going to go ahead and wipe out the spread of miners. And so this has actually happened in the field, and Dogecoin has actually gotten some degree of penetration. The other thing that happened, so it's basically been sort of a release valve. Instead of there being pressure on Bitcoin to change, people just went ahead and built their own thing. That I did not expect. It's one of the reasons I was wrong. The other reason I was wrong, by the way, comes down to the fact that you ever hung out with any of the ASIC miner people? They're assholes. They have absolutely no care for the long-term health of this system. I mean, I cannot tell you I have not met more toxic people. I'm sorry. Yeah, this is me making some friends right now. But they are self-interested. And that actually is being a huge constraint on their behavior. They will talk the talk of they don't give a crap and they are going to take over the world in Bitcoin mining. But in their defense, at the present price of Bitcoin, there's about $780 million in cash being generated every year. And some huge portion of that goes to them as long as they don't screw it up. They're continuing to not screw it up. I don't know how long this is going to last. I thought they were going to screw it up pretty quickly. When they do eventually screw it up, and somebody's going to be North Korea, then maybe some proof of work changes will happen. But for now, one of the things that came up at the last Bitcoin Pacifica is that there was at the time about $150 million that had been invested in Bitcoin. And at the time, my reaction was, you know, transaction fees are not set in Bitcoin. These guys are going to go ahead, screw things up, and make transaction fees really high. And that was before I realized $780 million is a huge amount of money that pays back the 160 real quick. So, you know, that's just where the numbers fall, and it's an important thing to realize. One of the other important things to realize, and this came up in discussions earlier today, there's a lot of centralization in Bitcoin. Like, no, it's not like, you know, someone at max has 2 or 3 or 4%. Like, at this point, have you seen the photos of some of these mining pools? No one has hallways of chips that are running full bore and is only running at 4%. This is just not where the math goes. People could do nastiness, but right now it's just not in their interest. I want to talk a little bit about Mt. Gox. I know everyone is shocked that Mt. Gox finally went down. But it's interesting to look at kind of the significance of what's happened since. First of all, yet again, some huge, terrible thing has happened to Bitcoin, and Bitcoin has not crashed to zero. This is kind of amazing. Like, you know, it'd be like if there was a Bear Stearns or Lehman Brothers event every couple of months. But it's cool. Everyone keeps investing anyway. And you know, it is actually cool. It means this only happens when you have a technology that is actually fundamentally useful. I like to call Bitcoin a dollar bill with a teleporter. You know what? That would be awesome if it existed. It actually would be. And it turns out that it does, at least in every model that is actually meaningful and needed. So yes, there's all of these crashes, but it's really cool that you can send money from point A to point B anywhere in the world and it's actually going to work. I harp on this, but I think if there's one message I ever want the world to really, really start modeling, it's that all the other payment systems are failing too, and are failing huge chunks of society. Like, it's kind of a game sometimes figuring out how you can buy stuff. Like, can I use a check? Do I have to use cash? What about a credit card? What's the fee on my credit card? When I go shopping, am I going to be charged 59 cents? Might I have a minimum purchase type? Let's say I need to send money from a person to a person and not to a merchant. Does this particular mechanism function? Like, or I could just send some freaking Bitcoin and be done and move on with my life. Like, there is a genericity to Bitcoin that does not exist in the rest of payment systems. And this is at the heart of why this technology is so interesting. There is, in fact, so much regulation that is there to make sure that stuff can be taxed, that stuff can be traced, that stuff can be reverted, and the thing to realize, and this is kind of to speak to the neutrality and speak to why all this stuff is there. If enough people lose money because something broke, you get this pitchfork effect, where a whole bunch of people with pitchforks actually do show up at some government regulator's office and be like, who's gonna make us right? Who's gonna make us whole? We're going into our Series A right now, and so I'm having to learn all this stuff about investment and how many investors you're allowed to have before you make certain rules and this and that. And I ask, why are things like this? Like, do they just not want people to be able to get investment? And it's like, it's because some asshole did something and 2,000 people showed up with pitchforks. We're like, we never want this to happen again. It's not worth it for us. So, the regulators are not crazy. And at the end of the day, the libertarian side of all of us loves the whole model of, hey, you should just be able to do stuff. There shouldn't be like transaction reversions. If you lose your money, it's like losing cash on the street. You don't expect the government to hand it back to you. On the other hand, if 50,000 people lost money on the street the same day, it'd be a problem. So that tension is not to be ignored. And there's a lot of government that sort of gets paid for by taxes. What do you think? So that's kind of parts of what's going on. I've been really interested watching the multi-sig work happen in Bitcoin. The interesting thing about multi-sig is you do end up in a situation where your transfers, your funds, your actions with your money can be protected and gated by a third party that might be able to protect your data resources better than you can. And there's a whole bunch of really interesting things that can be built this way. By the way, it at first glance appears to be an ornate and ridiculous and almost broken way of doing this. No, don't worry about it. It's actually okay. Not only okay, all the normal ways you'd think to implement multi-sig are inferior to the way they actually did it. It took a while for me to be convinced of that, but it is actually well engineered for future uses. So I'm pretty happy about that. But keep in mind that multi-sig at the end is a kind of thing that can enforce taxation, that can demonstrate taxation. It's a great system for dealing with value-added taxes. It is not necessarily going to go in directions that everyone likes politically. This is part of the magic of Bitcoin. that we don't necessarily know where it's going to go, but we do see that it can implement a lot of stuff that is hard to do right now. I do want to mention transaction malleability. Transaction malleability, like most complaints about Bitcoin, is very technically interesting, not actually relevant. I did find half of it. I found the half where you could take a script signature and append extra stuff. There's emails with me and Gavin back in 2011 when I found that part. He convinced me it didn't matter. It truly didn't. The other one, the side where you can actually have multiple signatures that look like each other. No, that's actually a bug. It's actually a bug in Bitcoin. There's a rule. Not a rule. Better explanation is anytime there's a flaw, there's always the question of whose bug is it? There's a piece of Bitcoin where you had something that looked like it was a nice hash of a nice representation of an individual transaction. And there's a thing. If it looks like a duck and walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, don't be pissed if someone thinks it's a duck. This part of Bitcoin looked like it was a duck. And it looked like it was a nice way of representing a transaction. It looked like something that third parties building on top of Bitcoin could go ahead and depend on. It happened not to be because of really obscure weirdness in cryptography. The bug has been fixed, but more importantly, the bug was not exploited and is not the cause of Mt. Gox going down. If ever anyone said it was, that's a dirty lie. That's someone who most likely was insolvent and was looking for some excuse to say, no, it was Bitcoin's fault. The big important thing is that you can actually look in the blockchain to see what was going, if this thing was actually exploited. And, there was a little bit, but not, Mt. Gox killing. Mt. Gox did not need transaction malleability's help. I can be pretty snarky, it's true. And to the Bitcoin developers' credit, they have actually done the right thing. They have fixed the problem conclusively and in advance of any real scale of exploits. And in fact, I actually want to say I was really impressed watching all these exchanges saying, wait, there is something that could be a real problem. We are going to put the brakes on while we deal with it. It was the first time, I think, I could be corrected, that there was actually a core issue in Bitcoin that could have caused an issue. People put the stops on, took the hit, did the right thing, protected people's funds. Cool. I think that is, in fact, the way the world should work. I'm just taking one quick look at my notes. I'm not like reading my email while on stage here. I kind of have two last things I want to refer to, and then open it up to questions here. There are two things that really interest me about Bitcoin. The first thing I ever thought that would make Bitcoin fail was the size of the transaction log. I'm like, this is going to become too huge, and there's no way that huge numbers of systems can have 30, 40, 50, 100 gig logs of everything that's going on. I was wrong in two ways. First, I didn't foresee that the exchanges would actually absorb a lot of the scale of individual person-to-person transactions. This is one of the reasons why the exchanges are nice. They keep the blockchain from getting too big. Secondly, it turns out there's been a change since the early 80s. If there's one thing, not Bitcoin, but BitTorrent has shown us, yes, millions of people can manage to work together to synchronize huge files over time. This is actually becoming, if it's important enough, a thing that we can do. Whether we should do it is up in the air, but it is certainly something that we can. The big thing that I see in Bitcoin is not necessarily its impact in financial stuff, although that's huge, but it is demonstrating these capabilities that other fields are looking at. People are looking at creating naming systems. People are looking at creating file sharing systems. People are looking at, can we replace how trust is managed? And I don't know that Bitcoin is going to be the way to make it all work. But what I do know is that I'm seeing more investment in the right places because of Bitcoin to answer these questions. It has been a problem for ages, for decades, on how do we interact with data and not lose it all. In other words, there's some private keys, there's some private data. How do we manage it? The big thing that Bitcoin should be letting us do with all of our financial infrastructures, it should be giving us the most transparent financial infrastructure the world has ever known. Bitcoin is the first technology where you can't lie about how much money you have. Someone can say, prove you have these Bitcoins, and you can. Now, you can't do that if it's a sheet of paper living in a safe deposit box. And that's a problem. I actually want us to be able to say, Coinbase has this much money. Mt. Gox has this much money. And if it's fractional banking, fine. They can say we have this much money and this is our fraction and we can prove it. But the model that we've had to go to for technical limitations has been, oh, heck no, we got most of our money in a safe, and I'm sorry, I just can't prove that it's in a safe. As a protocol and as a system, Bitcoin can let us do better. I think it will. And I think in the process of us figuring out how to do it for Bitcoin, we'll be able to do it for a heck of a lot more things. And so while I am neutral on the technology itself, maybe it'll work, maybe it won't, from a redefining society's interaction with finance. I am not neutral with Bitcoin when it comes to this is going to change the way we interact with our data that is sensitive, that is being hacked day in and day out. The investments that I'm seeing here are profound and significant and will lead to a safer internet. So that's my perspective, and I'm open for questions. Go ahead. Excuse me, I have to get some water, though.
Being a tool used for taxation, regulation, monitoring, etc.
So multi-sig allows you basically to, excuse me. Multi-sig does a lot of stuff to allow multiple parties to be involved in a transaction. To be able to basically say, look, there's stuff that's going on, and it's not just signed by me, it's signed by somebody else. We can all prove it. We have to all participate in the spending of it. It's mostly being proposed as a way that, you and your mom and whatnot can basically, how do we spread the risk of a transaction? And what I'm basically saying is, it's not just spreading the risk of a transaction, it's spreading the trust of a transaction. Other people can see, okay, this side was involved as well. And can see, more importantly, that it wasn't involved. Like, hey, where's your signature from your taxation agent? That too can be implemented. I understand, I've said this before, I understand that there's a huge amount of people in Bitcoin who really want the anonymity, who really want the, you can just gin up accounts, no one knows who they are and whatnot. That will always exist, but there's going to be an aggressively non-anonymous version of Bitcoin. There's going to be a version where you are only sending transactions to people who are very explicitly authenticated, very explicitly known, and maybe it's direct, maybe it's, we don't know who this is, but they are represented by Coinbase, or they are represented by, somebody else. There will be a non-anonymous version of Bitcoin, and that's going to make certain types of regulated behavior possible. Whether that's good or bad, I don't know.
Follow-on question. Talk about zero coin.
Talk about zero coin?
Mm-hmm.
I haven't studied enough about zero coin to be able to correctly comment.
You mentioned earlier that there's that the federal regulators don't really like Bitcoin, despite what they're saying publicly. What do you think is going to happen between large control, like central banked governments, and Bitcoin when Bitcoin has 100x the value and 100x the users?
First of all, not when, if.
When I used to speak about Bitcoin, my talk was called Financing the Revolution. So,
it's important to be clear. People are saying Bitcoin is going to take down the dollar. The euro is a much bigger front against the dollar. So it's like saying, what if the euro took down the dollar? Like, the dollar survived the euro, the dollar's surviving Bitcoin. Bitcoin is a much bigger threat to inefficient payment systems than it is to the fundamental currencies themselves. Like, I can't 100% vouch for this, but my understanding is that the volume of Bitcoin transactions is now significantly more than the volume of Western Union transactions. And this doesn't surprise me at all, because I've never actually had a Western Union transaction go through. I've tried. They have a couple $1,000s of my money, but they still have that money. I think there is a non-zero chance, and I'd say even up there in like I'm never going to say 100% chance again. But I do think there's like, some double-digit chance that it will become a sovereign exchange some point in the next few years, and maybe even in the next few months. By sovereign exchange, I mean a state in which there is an established system, an established currency that is not the dollar or the euro. The state has its own currency. The state will accept trades between their state currency and Bitcoin. That might actually happen. Now, whether all hell breaks loose when that happens, I don't know, but I'd say the odds are rather high on that if it did.
Ecuador to do it?
I have not studied zero coin enough. I have not studied Ecuador enough.
Have you considered going double or nothing on your bet with a time extension?
I think I will. I can certainly promise I will never make a bet again in a floating currency. I don't need a double or nothing. No, it was a 10 Bitcoin bet made a year ago. I should have acquired the 10 Bitcoins when I made the bet. That's okay. You learn things. It get worse. It can always get worse. There's a question over here.
you mentioned the sovereign exchanges. Could you maybe elaborate on some reasons that a nation state would want to instrument a sovereign exchange?
To piss the United States off. I'm not actually joking. I think the moral authority of the U.S. has degraded somewhat in the last 10 or 15 years. And there's a lot of countries out there. And there's a lot of, let's be honest, the country that goes ahead and does this, if it is not sufficient diplomatic pressure to create large-scale sanctions, the country that goes ahead and creates the Bitcoin exchange is going to have a flow of money coming in. So, sources of hard currency are actually rather appreciated. And if it means that you have to sell, crazy internet bits for real hard money, actually, that sounds kind of awesome. So that's kind of my thinking here. Somebody is going to see this as a money-making opportunity to make their currency more valuable because it's a bridge between ultimately dollars and euros and Bitcoin. It's like, oh, I have to buy, some yen, or I have to buy some whatever Ecuador's currency is, and now I can go ahead and trade for dollars, and oh, well, I'm paying a 10% fee. That's a lot of money for Ecuador. That's kind of my thinking. Somebody will do the math and then ask the questions, how bad will the sanctions be? And the deal with the sanctions is sanctions are actually the kind of big, large-scale stuff that you don't do against the internet because that raises the hackles. So you've got a great trap. That's my thinking. It's too big to sanction, and anything less than sanction is not enough to make it not financially worthwhile. What are you going to do? Say this currency can't be on the global exchanges anymore? Not referring to Bitcoin, but whatever Ecuador's currency is? Too big. Here, I'll bring it over. By the way, can I say how weird it is being like the hacker talking about like economics? Like I'm personally deeply aware that at least something I'm saying has to be full of it. And I won't know.
I'm happy with the economics. I'm questioning the political science. I don't quite understand how or why, under what legal framework we would sanction a country for opening a financial exchange. I don't think that's ever happened. Has somebody seriously talked about this?
Well, there's law and there's reality, and international law is pretty weak. Look at it like this. Whatever country had an exchange would almost certainly generate a significant amount of revenue. Getting hard currency is a huge deal for lots and lots of little countries with their own currencies. So the fact that nobody's done it yet is interesting. Why would all of these countries have not already created the exchange? What's the counterforce? And the counterforce is some sort of political pressure, some sort of threat. Remember, verbally, the states are all like rah, rah when it comes to Bitcoin. Like, like on the large scale. But all of the small scale communication is not so positive. So whatever small scale communication is happening between the states is not positive on Bitcoin.
Sure. Okay. So, I mean, you don't really mean necessarily sanctions, but just pressure or, other kinds of quid pro quo. Although I guess you could imagine if you had some sort of, if you could show that they were violating sanctions, like official sanctions, then you could bring some other tools to bear. It just seems a little bit far-fetched to me that you would do something like really an official state policy against a country for opening a financial exchange.
hang on. Let's get the mic over. What I'm saying is that there's some evidence from absence, because there's enough money at stake that something has to be telling states, don't do this. And I could be wrong. I could be completely wrong, but that's my perception. And
I was just going to ask, for a country to start backing their currency with Bitcoin, don't they need a large stash of Bitcoin, or at least a large market cap or circulation value stash of Bitcoin? They need to acquire that first, right, to sort of back it.
I don't see the model where a country, okay, labor is what backs a currency, labor and natural resources. I don't see Bitcoin at its present form exceeding the value of our country does stuff. If you send us work, we'll do it. If you want some trees, we'll ship them to you. The first phase of it is absolutely going to be the work we're doing is giving you an exchange of currency into something that you can change on the global, like on something of a larger and more reliable scale than Coinbase can offer. You know, Coinbase can offer stuff at small scale, but you know, an actual state that actually has labor and resources can do exchanges at a much larger scale.
So you're talking about a country offering a fiat to Bitcoin exchange.
Yeah.
Not so much the country offering its own currency to be backed by Bitcoin.
Yeah. It would basically be the country says, we do our sovereign right is to go ahead and take this Bitcoin weird stuff and we'll give you real currency. Or to take dollars and we'll give you Bitcoin, or to do whatever. You know, or if you more specifically, if you give us our currency, we'll give you Bitcoin in exchange. You know, model that out. What does that look like? That ends up looking like a country getting more hard currency.
It's a country that clearly wants to increase its international trade.
Yeah. Bitcoin, the whole point of Bitcoin, it is the most efficient system for international trade ever devised, period. The number of middlemen goes to effectively zero. The speed is effectively instantaneous. Like, remittances are a huge deal. Being able to buy stuff from overseas is massive. The amount of work it can take to go ahead and complete an international purchase is not necessarily small. I've been involved in a couple of these, and it's hard. You have a merchant that'll accept Bitcoin, it's just like, done, it's closed in an hour, now ship me my stuff. It's great. So, you know, it is in fact a transformative technology. I mean, the flip side of this is there are no takebacks, there are no reversions. And, you know, a lot of computers right now are compromised. Our company deals with problems where there's 20 million actual human users who have their machines that are compromised by bad guys. You have Bitcoin wallets on 20 million machines, you know, you're looking, even if they all had only $20, it's $400 million. That's real money. And if there's $400 million that's stolen, there's no way of getting it back, you know, that's a lot of pitchforks. So, not necessarily, there's awesome sides of this, and there's complicated sides of this.
Moving away from economics for a second.
Cool. I am actually a nerd, I promise.
And back to security. Back to security.
Bring it.
So, you know, what areas, and it's a fairly generic question, but, you know, you tried to look into Bitcoin. I'm not really familiar other than Dan's comment a couple minutes ago, but you looked at Bitcoin a couple years ago. You weren't able to hack it. Where do you see areas of, you know, security vulnerability in the Bitcoin protocol or cryptocurrencies in general? Where would you focus your efforts over the next few years? What do you think are some areas which are potentially problematic?
It's always the metacode. Bitcoin is always the code that's around the core. You know, I've talked to a number of people at exchanges that are like, Bitcoin was always fine, but it was our, you know, the website that it's on, the server infrastructure that it's on, you know, the environment that's around it. That's what always gets compromised in Bitcoin. The core protocol, it's like, well, it's written in C++, it listens on the network, it's its own fiddly little language, and if you compromise it, you'll win all the money in the world. Like, you would expect such a thing to die, like, instantaneously, and it didn't. It didn't at all. We all thought it would. Like, everyone who audits Bitcoin says you look at it and you think it's going to fail, and you think you know the 15 places it's going to fail, and it just systematically defeats you. And you get more excited every time it does. So it's not the core that's probably going to fail us. The worst bugs we ever have are this little transaction malleability over here, and the complete emptiness of the quote-unquote unfair mining stuff over there. Like, if you looked at these bugs in the context of any other system, you'd be like, that's it? So the core is fine. But everything else we build around it, especially how do we handle the keys that are actually the money, everything else is difficult. And that's stuff that we've not solved. How do we make a secure wallet? How do you do that? How do you actually make a system people can interact with? Forgot to mention this in my talk. There's a huge amount of technologies around secure interfacing between devices. I promise you, you connect something over Bluetooth, it's owned. You connect something over Wi-Fi, it's owned. There's lots of ways where you can have systems interact with each other that are going to fail, not because the work you do is bad, but because you selected a bad foundation. What I love about Bitcoin is it's forcing us to actually ask these hard questions. How do we make systems that mutually do not trust each other? How do we let them communicate? And there's work in the acoustic space, there's work in the visual space that's not QR codes. There's a ton of work being done. What we see in whatever solution we pick for Bitcoin is not going to be used for just Bitcoin. That's exciting.
I really like your points and agree with your points about Bitcoin kind of creating the economic conditions for focusing on a lot of these issues. And I've always thought that Bitcoin, the operating systems that all of us use are 40 plus years old. They were designed over 40 years ago without, you know, thinking about the issues of the modern day internet, right? And I've always thought that Bitcoin might actually precipitate the conditions necessary to foster a completely new operating system. I wonder if you think that might happen, actually.
I think what it will do is it will foster isolation. So there's been this dream. Your 40-year point is completely correct. All of our major operating systems are built on the dream that you have one computer and lots of users who are using them that need to be kept separate. And let me tell you, this is not actually how computers work anymore. Computers are all single-user devices, even when they're not. Even though websites that we build that legitimately have hundreds of thousands of users are not using the operating system's mechanisms for separating those users. So this, what we call multi-tenancy approach, has really not worked very well. I do see, apologies, this is nerding out a bit, but yes, I do see interesting operating system designs that are built around, okay, we have one user, that's it. We are not going to have one computer, many users. We're going to have lots and lots of computers, and let's make it so individual pieces that are in fact separate hardware, that are in fact little tiny coins, like physical coins that have a battery in them, you keep in your pocket. figure out how to keep those things communicating, but mutually distrustful. I think that is going to happen. Or at least I know that that's going to be researched.
What do you think it is about the Bitcoin protocol that makes it so unusually robust? And what part of it do you think we're going to take out and translate into just general networking and communications?
I would not recommend normal people do what Bitcoin did. Okay, so the deal is something along the lines of this. You can write in C++, but you're likely to blow your foot off. You can write in a higher level language, a JavaScript, a Python, or whatnot, but you're likely to accidentally import something that you didn't even realize that blows your foot off. That's the normal way of things. The situation I saw in Bitcoin was that when you use C++, you actually know exactly what you're doing. Like, you've built the universe up from first principles and made it relatively easy to access. If you do everything right, you actually don't blow your foot off. That's what they did. Now, whether that's something I'd recommend anyone else do, probably not. The difference with Bitcoin is they were building something, whoever Satoshi was, that they knew was going to be under attack. It wasn't like a doubt or a question or a maybe. They knew the moment they put this thing out, it was going to get hit. And so the question is, so there was none of this, well, maybe we'll get around to security. Now, what almost certainly did happen was they screwed a bunch of things up. Because when you actually go through the code, you can find where the bugs should be, and then that line of code's missing. Or they have one line of code that just covers that case. So I don't think they got it right the first time, but they audited it really deeply. That much is clear. I am a code auditor. I spent years at Microsoft. This code has been scrubbed. It's hard to go from that to a recommendation, because it's hard to know if anyone else, like, there are easier ways to get to this state of affairs. But they certainly did it, that's for sure. I think there was one, I know of one bug, there was some bug where, like, you could get a negative amount of Bitcoin to get sent, and that negative got interpreted as, you know, trillions and trillions of Bitcoin. So that did happen once. So they did have one genuine, oh my God, stop the world bug. So they didn't get it perfect, but certainly better than any other package I've seen.
Can you go back to the sort of virus malware point? So in some sense, that's a very economic business. They respond to incentives. It moves relatively quickly. I'm sort of surprised there haven't been more problems from, you know, specifically targeted malware and so on. So can you say a little bit about why that hasn't happened, whether you expect it to happen, and what can be done to defend against it?
So there have definitely been botnets that have mined for Bitcoin. One of the big ones, I think it was Zero Access, actually stopped mining Bitcoin because they were making a lot more money through advertising fraud, like by like 20 or 30x. The problem with mining Bitcoin is that you do actually like have an impact on the system. And also, because the ASICs are so powerful, it doesn't make that. Yeah, so the easiest way to steal used to be to just mine. It was, you know, there were a lot more machines out there that had CPU and GPU power than had coin on the machine. There was recently a dump of the data out of Mt. Gox, where Kaspersky found that the data had some executables, and the executables, if ran, would scrape whatever Bitcoin was on your machine and send them to some third-party location. It's unclear, at least from the data I have, Kaspersky may know more, It's unclear whether that code was run at Mt. Gox or whether it was inserted by the hacker into the Mt. Gox data dump, so that if you were investigating the Mt. Gox data dump, you would lose your Bitcoin. So I just don't know which case that is, and so I can't speculate. You are right that it is likely that more and more malware will silently watch, see you log into Coinbase, see you log into your exchange that is storing your money, and will, via a bot, move your money out of your account. That hasn't happened that much yet, but what we know is that lots and lots of malware is already running bots using browsers on your machine. Certainly accessing your traditional bank accounts, that's been a problem for several years. The malware is called Zeus, or at least the malware family. It logs into your bank account. So you'll do like 17 transactions, or do like the all two-factor authentication, SMS. When you're done, 3 more transactions will happen and your bank account goes to 0. So that's definitely been a problem.
So just a minor correction. Bitcoin, not to refute your point at all about how high quality Bitcoin is, but the transaction script language, huge quagmire, probably overly ambitious and vulnerable to Stack Overflow that let me crash testnet in 2009. But then they locked that down, and like that one was fixed like near instantly as well.
Yeah.
But
So there's an entire programming language in Bitcoin that they built and is really cool
go wrong.
and really interesting, and they basically shut it down with violent aggression, and not without reason. I'm not going to hold Bitcoin accountable to something that they turned off 5 years ago and refused to turn back on. But it did ship. True.
Dan, could you talk a little bit about the future, smart contracts, AI systems using Bitcoin, things like that?
I haven't thought about this in a while. You'll have to give me a second.
I'll embellish a little bit. So I feel like, cash, the ability to move value is a core part of what we think about in terms of society. And, for an AI to function reasonably in a society, it would have to have access to funds. Bitcoin seems like a very reasonable electronic currency for an AI to use.
Well, so here's the interesting question. Can you build a system where, based on things that happen in the environment, cash transfers occur automatically? Like, you don't have to wait, like, you don't have to guess whether the other party is going to fulfill their contract. The mere, and correct me if I'm misunderstanding, the mere occurrence of something happening is enough to cause the transfer to be recognizable by the greater community and thus to accept it. Is that right?
I'm thinking, I sell a couple of houses and buy a yacht. And it just happens. I program my AI to do that.
AIs can already go ahead and, there's lots of scripting environments that allow you to, like, interact with PayPal, send money here, expect money there, and so on. The question is if anyone is going to go ahead and, because the other sides might say, yeah, I know I agreed to do that, but I don't feel like it. And so we have these old complex escrow systems, but you still trust the escrow agent. Can you do escrow scale transactions without an escrow agent based on elements in Bitcoin? And the answer is kind of, sort of, maybe, but leaning towards it's hard for the Bitcoin system itself to know that the necessary preconditions have actually been met, because preconditions can often be really tied to real world stuff.
I'm thinking, like, with just a little bit before web services and automation, which did happen, and maybe it's almost there. So what do you think it's going to take? How close are we? And what happens when we get there?
Honestly, I don't think I'm fully qualified to speak to this, but I do feel like our ability to get the necessary preconditions into Bitcoin itself is the hard part that is not, you effectively still need an escrow agent to declare that a truth has happened. And so you're still vulnerable to the escrow agent. Let me put it this way. I am sure you can avoid the situation where the escrow agent runs away with the money. That part I can guarantee. I can say to you that yes, you can get into a situation where two sides agree that the escrow agent either approves the transaction or does not approve it, but there's never a transfer of value to the guy in the middle. That much is going to happen. I think you can build that today with multi-sig. But what I don't think can happen is that it'll be automatic, where Bitcoin will just magically know, aha, you know, the stock price went up 30, so this other thing has to happen. Or, you know, the house passed inspection, so this had to happen. I think that gets really tricky. Go ahead.
Do you think that botnets are a threat to scrypt-based altcoins? And this sort of gets back to the question of whether you should go double or nothing on your bet.
All right. So the deal with botnets is this. In an scrypt world where you can't, excuse me. Whew. In an scrypt world where you can't have a bunch of ASICs that automatically win, the 20 million node botnet actually has the most mining power. And that is a problem for Dogecoin. I think someone mentioned that it actually was a problem for Feathercoin. And it leads to this really interesting, kind of cute observation, which is that Bitcoin has effectively made the argument somewhat successfully that the global masses cannot be trusted to run a financial system, and what you need is a small group of financial elite to build the large-scale infrastructure and maintain it because they're the only ones who can be trusted. Not necessarily an incorrect argument, but that's what it means to say botnets need to be stopped from owning the mining power. This argument has been made, and I got to admit there is something compelling about it. That being said, I don't think it is absolutely not in the core Satoshi Bitcoin design that you have mining pools with 49.999% of the power. It is absolutely not in the core Satoshi design that you have buildings full of SHA-256 chips. It's not supposed to be that centralized. One of the effects of it being this centralized, and I've been harping on this for a while, transaction fees are not set in Bitcoin. If you control more than 50% of Bitcoin mining power, the most powerful thing to do is not to go ahead and block things willy-nilly or fork the blockchain or whatever. You just block anything mined that contains a transaction fee that's too small. You say, oh, nope, sorry, this one has something less than 10%. We don't support less than 10%. We take the money back. You get to do that if you have more than 50%. And if you do that, it is now not in the interest of anyone else to ever allow a block to come in that has the insufficient mining fee. So that scares me.
Don't you think P2Pool ultimately is the answer to that, and that most mining will move to that?
I don't think anyone has really realized, first of all, anything like any large pool gets to make this call. They themselves get to do it. And secondly, the scale of, it is not clear to me. So one of the things I'd wanted to see is something called proof of execution, which basically says, here's a function that's beyond scrypt, where the performance is basically tied to your speed at executing x86, or some actual executable language. And here's why. there is some language, there is some function where the speed of your process follows the speed of x86 execution. And that performance increase is practically modelable. It's not 0. It'll never go up 5,000x. SHA-256 mining might actually go up 5,000x. That's a really small function. So you can have a situation that happens tomorrow where there's a breakthrough and that entire building full of chips is outmined by something that sits on this table and outmined by 100x. And that guy, he doesn't share his chips because now he has something way more valuable. And let me tell you, that guy's probably an asshole. I know, I think I met him. You know, I've considered, literally after I met the guy, I'm like, you are going to make me win my bet. So my fear is that we can't model the long-term performance increase of SHA-256 mining like we can even model the increase in gold mining or even in S-crypt mining. We have no idea how fast it's going to grow. We want it to go up, but we don't want it to explode because then one guy gets all the marbles.
How do you feel about proof of stake or the Ripple consensus system as alternatives?
Proof of stake feels like let's make sure whoever's rich stays rich and makes me a little nervous. And Ripple's a whole other deeper story that my throat hurts too much to get into. Any other questions? Well, with that, I think this has been one of the more fun talks I've ever given. So thank you so much for your time.